Let's talk about reduced adjectival clauses. Also, they're called reduced relative clauses. I'm going to be calling them adjectival clauses, but it's the same thing. Let's just review what an adjectival clause is. So this clause right here, that I like, it's acting like an adjective because it is modifying or providing more information about the noun, the dog. But how do you reduce this? Well, let's look at an example of how this is done. In this example, we have the dog that I like is sleeping, and then we have the reduced version, which is the dog I like is sleeping. The only real difference is that the relative pronoun that has been removed from the sentence. Grammatically, they're a little bit different, but as far as meaning goes, they both mean exactly the same thing. The only real difference here is that the non-reduced version is more common in formal academic writing, but in spoken English, you can use either one whenever you'd like. Let's look at another example here. The dog that has spots is sleeping, but you cannot remove the relative pronoun that and get the dog has spots is sleeping. That is incorrect. So why is it that in this case you can reduce the clause, but in this case you cannot reduce the clause? The answer has to do with the relationship between the relative pronoun, which in this case is that, and the verb. Well, when I say the verb, I mean the verb in the adjectival clause. In this case here, it's like, and in this case here, it is has. A very quick review here. A pronoun, if we remember a pronoun, it is a word that can represent a noun. In this example here, we have the Queen of England is reading a book, or she is reading a book, and she can represent the Queen of England. So it's a pronoun. It can replace the noun, and grammatically it works the same. Let's not forget that our relative pronouns are also pronouns. They're a little bit different because they introduce adjectival clauses, but they are also pronouns. In both of these cases, our relative pronoun represents the dog. We should also notice that our relative clauses have verb phrases. Now we've pointed it out here by showing that both of these have a verb, and I will mark it here. So has is the verb in this case. And if we remember that the word that is a pronoun that represents the dog, we can then cross out that and replace it with the dog. And we get actually a grammatical sentence. If you want it to be a sentence, you can say the dog has spots. But what's the relationship between the dog and has? Well, the dog actually is the subject of the sentence, if you remember back to earlier grammar. And spots then would be the object of the verb. Since the dog is the subject, that means that the word that, even though we've crossed it out here, is also the subject because it represents the dog and it holds sort of the same grammatical position. And we can do the same thing with the sentence above. So let's take this adjectival clause as an example, and we can do the same thing here. We can take like, and we'll say that's the verb. In this case, we can see right away that I is the subject, but what then would that be? If we remember that that represents the dog, that might help us to sort of visualize this or conceptualize this a little bit better. And if we say the dog I like, well, that doesn't really work in normal English. It's not the normal way that we construct sentences in English. But if I said that, it sounded really funny, but you would realize that what I was really meaning is I like the dog. And that would mean that this would be the object. So the real difference between these two clauses is that the relative pronoun represents the object of the adjectival clause verb, and in this case, the relative pronoun represents the subject of the relative clause verb. And that's the difference, and that's why this one you can reduce and this one you cannot reduce. So just to recap and look at these rules one more time, when relative pronouns are the subject of the clause, they cannot be reduced. On the other hand, when relative pronouns are the object of the clause, they can be reduced.